Today, the Reserve Government Board met and kept interest rates on hold as widely expected. However, there has been some interesting economic events that have occurred over the last month. Let's look at those in detail. The first one I want to look at is the market volatility. So there's lots of share market volatility, and globally speaking, there's a lot of headwinds that we're facing in terms of economic outputs across the developed nations around the world. We're seeing that the Americans, who were predicting their rates to come off virtually zero, haven't actually moved at all because of that market volatility. And now we're starting to see maybe that rates won't move in the States until early in the new year. Then let's turn to China, who's obviously our biggest trading partner. Now, what we're seeing in the Chinese market is a softening of their GDP. Now, that GDP is an important number for us because they do so much buying of our raw materials. So the flow-on effect has been our mining stocks have been smashed in regards to their share price, and just the general market sentiment has obviously kept that volatility in the market. So we're seeing this bounciness happening around economic output, economic activity, and what that's doing to our share market prices. Now, the other big move that we saw in the last month has been a new Prime Minister, sliding doors. Malcolm Turnbull has arrived as our new leader of the Liberal Party, and because they're in power, he takes on the Prime Ministership. Now, what that did for business confidence was really important. There's obviously, Malcolm has a lot of business acumen. He's been very successful in business, as opposed to Tony Abbott, who has been a career-long politician, hasn't necessarily been in the corporate world. Malcolm has. So we're going to see a big focus on the economy and a big focus on innovation, which is exactly what we need, because at the end of the day, we're not seeing enough work being done by business to actually get this economy moving. So not only is it a responsibility of big business, but also small business to get that happening. So we do need things like tax reform. We do need more support for innovation and entrepreneurial type activity to get the economy moving forward. So it's important that we look at that, because the headwinds are these. When you get volatility in the stock market, when you get concern, and we're seeing that in the sentiment numbers and the confidence numbers, you actually then see people starting to retract in their spending and what they're doing. So let's think about those. Let's look at the NAB business survey. In terms of business conditions, we've seen a real increase in regards to business conditions. And I suspect that's a flow-on effect from a low Australian dollar. And I want to talk about the Australian dollar more in a moment. In terms of consumer confidence, what we're seeing is a softening number. So we're down at around 99. Now, this consumer sentiment survey has been running since 1974. And in round terms, it's averaged around 101 to 102. Okay, with the worst number ever was back in 1990. I think it was in November of 1990, where we saw consumer confidence at around 64, 65. And the best ever was around 2015 in January, when we saw consumer confidence at around 127, 128. So in the grand scheme of things, we're not at that chronic low level, and we're certainly not super optimistic. We're sitting in the middle, so we're on the fence. And that's why we need great leadership, good confidence, business getting out there and spending money to keep the economy moving. If we don't do that, and if we pull up into our shells and we stop spending, then what we might get into is potentially that R word. And I don't want to talk about it just now, because I want to be positive about the economy. But if we do start to see that sentiment, those headwinds start to get very negative, and the whole sentiment negative, we will move into a technical recession. Now, a technical recession is 2 quarters of negative GDP. Now, in the last quarter, our GDP was only 0.2 of 1%. So we almost had a negative quarter, and that was after the budget stimulus around small business spending. So we are going to face some headwinds moving into the economic future of our country. Now, what is that going to mean to interest rates medium to longer term? Well, there's probably more risk or more likelihood of further reductions to the cash rate into the new year if the economy doesn't continue to pick up momentum. That could see at least 1, possibly 2 reductions in the cash rate if that occurs. Now, to you as a borrower, what does that mean? Are we going to see lower interest rates in terms of what we're paying? I don't think so. Importantly, as part of this message, I think even though the cash rate's going to go down, there is a lot of talk that the actual retail rate, so what you and I pay as mortgage holders, is actually not going to change too much at all. In fact, I suspect the banks are going to come up with some excuses, and APRA and also the RBA are going to put pressure on the banks to try and make sure that it's not going to lead to a further asset appreciation bubble. Okay, and when you see very low cost of money, that's exactly what you get in terms of asset appreciating, that rising tide lifting all the ships. So I suspect there might be a concerted focus on reducing that cash rate to try and focus on business activity as opposed to domestic or residential activity. We don't necessarily need much more of that. Now, that will hopefully focus on more construction work, more in business investment, more business lending, which will get that economy moving forward. Now, I wanted to talk about the Australian dollar. The good news with the Australian dollar, hovering around 70 cents, want to get it down a little bit lower. Probably around 67, 68 is pretty amazing country. Could go, if we go into recession, as low as 65. But in my terms, I think 68 is where we're going to probably finish up. If we have a good economic pathway and a good recovery, we'll probably sit around that 70, 73, 74 cent mark. Now, what is a low Australian dollar good for? Well, naturally it's good for our exports. Okay, so it's good for our manufacturing, it's good for our primary production, selling all of those, agricultural goods, our meats, etc., our cheeses, our dairy, all of that, really, really important. But secondly to that, there's two other areas. And one other area that has been sluggish of late has been immigration. Immigration had been slowing. So I suspect a low Australian dollar, we want to encourage more and more foreign students to our universities. Now, those foreign students are really, really important for the long-term future. We need a growing population, okay? We have a really high wage cost. It makes us uncompetitive in manufacturing. So it's really important that we bring this new immigration in, they get their qualifications, and hopefully they secure a visa and they stay and they form part of the great multicultural Australia that we currently enjoy. If we have that low cost in terms of low Australian dollar, we get that foreign investment, we get those foreign students coming in, and they are going to do some of the heavy lifting that we need because they'll build out our population, they'll rent the properties that we're building, the investment properties that we're building as well, which is really important until they stabilise and then potentially buy their own home here in Australia. And the other thing about a low Australian dollar is tourism. Inbound tourism is going to be an important part for building GDP. Okay, again, as we transition from the capex expenditure in the mining and we move to mainstream production and a softening production at that, we're going to need to look at these types of industries to bring those people in. So I expect that Australia will become flavour of the month, again, in terms of international arrivals coming to enjoy the beautiful natural wonders that we have here in Australia. Really, really important. And I suspect some of the domestic tourism may look to put off their holidays whilst the dollar's lower and have an interstate holiday as a short break up into Queensland. That's going to be good for Queensland. It's going to be good for the Queensland economy. Certainly the tropical North Queensland areas are going to enjoy, I suspect, a spike in terms of tourism activity and what's going to happen in those regions as well. So in summary, we're going to see potentially interest rates on hold for the long period with a possible reduction in interest rates early into the 2000s. I'm not buying into a rate cut at the next board meeting, which is the Melbourne Cup November board meeting. Some are, but I'm not going to go there, even though I think from memory, the last couple of years we've actually seen a rate cut on those Melbourne Cup Day. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're going to try and ride it out. If conditions deteriorate further, obviously that will mean a rate cut prior to the new calendar year. But for me, I think interest rates on hold. And I'm still a believer that I don't think interest rates will go down lower until we see further deterioration across the broader economy. But we've all got a job to do. We've got to get out there and spend. We've got to enjoy. I don't mind you saving and paying some debts down, but we've also got to contribute. Because if that changes, job security changes. So it's a really important message. And I finally want to leave you with this point. On our website, in the next couple of weeks, you'll see me producing a new video on what's going to happen in regards to pricing interest rates and pricing mortgages into the future. In the past, we've seen mortgages priced based on general, 0.7, 0.8% discounts off the standard variable rate and a sort of across the board type pricing regime. That's going to change. We're going to see mortgages go down to what we call risk pricing analysis based on the household. And so that's going to be part of this change that we're going to see in terms of mortgages over the next possibly 18 months to 36 months. And I want to share a video on that information for you, and that'll be available under our mortgage section on our website. Thanks for watching.